Hello, everybody. Greetings to all. Welcome to the Snooker Hall Podcast. I'm Dan Moran. After a few weeks away, the Snooker Hall Podcast is back, and snooker as a sport is almost back. The 2024-25 season is in the books, and the snooker world is looking forward to a brand new campaign. A lot has changed over the past year, and there is a lot to talk about. To discuss the events of the last season and to look ahead to the new season, I'll need some help, and help doesn't get any better than this. My guest today on the Snooker Hall podcast has played the sport at the highest level. He is a ranking event winner. He has defeated some of the great names in snooker, and he was ranked as high as number 3 in the world. As a commentator and a pundit, he's one of the most respected voices in snooker, providing honest and detailed insight for millions of viewers at home. I'm very happy to say that Neal Foulds is on the Snooker Hall podcast.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Neil. Yeah, you?
Yeah, good. Very good.
Busy summer for you so far, or have you been a bit more chilled out?
No, I think at the end of the World Championships, the period leading up to that is such a long one. I mean, I was away from home from the tournament in Manchester, the Tour Championship, right through to the end of the World Seniors, and that's like about a 6, 7 week continuous loop of not being anywhere but in hotel rooms. But I enjoyed the job. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, the little I mean, the close season seems to be getting shorter and shorter now. But a month or a few weeks, let's just say, after even when Q School finished, which I quite like to just keep an eye on that, there is no snooker right now, which I think is good, really. You have to have a break from things, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this point about the close season becoming a lot shorter, I think there is some truth to that. The Seniors Championship, it feels like a part of the tour now, whereas before maybe it felt a bit more exhibition-y, but now it feels like a real event.
Yeah, I think all of these events need a little bit of time to bed in. There's two things about it. On the downside, and if there is one, I mean, I really enjoy the scenes. I think it's a great addition. Um, it comes at after the World Championships, so it's quite difficult for anything to work well there. But I think it does. I think that Jason Francis has allowed that to work because he's playing at the Crucible. I mean, obviously, there's no better and more convenient time to play there than straight after the championship when a lot of the cameras and the lights and the people involved in the championship from behind the scenes are still there. So, if you tried to play it at the Crucible at any other time, I'm not sure you could quite achieve it really. There's still a bit of a buzz from the championship itself. You're playing in the Crucible, and yeah, it's a good event. And there's one by a good friend of mine, actually, Alfie Burden. So I was pleased for that. Okay, some of the more likely winners went out straight away. Last year's winner went out, and Ken and Jimmy and Dominic and Joe Pett all lost early. So it's quite an interesting event the way it unfolded.
But he's been a great servant to snooker. I don't think many will begrudge him a victory there.
No, because his disappointment would have been that he couldn't get through Q school straight after it, and it shows you how difficult Q school is. Um, so he's off tour now. So it was a mixed few weeks for him. He won the World Seniors and then he disappeared off the tour, and he has sort of said that he's going to retire before, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that score. I do think one thing, just on well before we get going, I don't quite know one thing about Q School, which is slightly bugs me, is that why the very last match still is best of seven because they're playing it 10 o'clock in the morning. There might be a logical reason for that, that people all need a rest. Um, Tables have to be recovered, but I don't see why they couldn't at least make the last match a best of nine because it's ever so cutthroat, a best of seven straight off at the end of Q School to be on the tour. I'm not sure quite if that can't be extended slightly, not all day, just a little bit more. But anyway, that's that out the way. It's a little minor bugbear of mine.
No, there's some grounds to this because there are a lot of people. I slightly disagree with this opinion, but there are a lot of people who will say that the best of sevens at the home nations events, it's more of a lottery. I hate that word, but I'll say it anyway. That it can be a lottery. I think Judd Trump proves that it's not a lottery. His record in best of seven matches is incredible. But in terms of preparation for main tour matches, sometimes these matches go a long way. Yeah, obviously best of
Yeah.
19 at the first round of the World Championship. If a player does make it that far, maybe they should be prepared a bit more.
Mm. Just a slightly longer match, really. I mean, I don't see any reason why it has to stay a best of seven. No reason I can think of. And certainly, if it's to do with anything like, as I say, getting things prepared for the next tournament, well, the second tournament is the last matches of the season. So there's nothing to prepare for after that. Anyway, it's that someone might explain to me why it's only a best of seven, but I'm glad, good luck to all the people that got through, former professionals and a couple of newcomers, which I'm looking forward to seeing. It is nice to see the new faces come through, I think in some ways to see new players on the tour, it's very interesting to see how they handle the whole experience, I believe. Some do better than others. Um, I was at an event last week actually in Wolverhampton, a presentation, and I'd met up with a fellow called Riley Parsons, who I remember playing on the tour 5 years ago. He played 2 years during COVID, and he's not, he plays in the leagues up there now. And you kind of can easily forget these sort of people that have been on the tour, didn't pull up any trees, and just disappeared out of sight. So he's obviously a very good player, but he doesn't always necessarily. It doesn't. The best players available do not always make it through. It's a random draw in short matches, but I mean, looking forward to seeing these guys in the season to come and see how they play.
Yeah, new faces and obviously some old faces coming back
Yeah.
on tour. We'll get onto that. Over the break, have you been following any other sports?
Yeah, well, I'm a massive cricket fan. I mean, if anyone who looks at my social media, I haven't gone too deep on it so far, but cricket's been a big part of my life actually. And in the summer, I end up ranting about cricket all the time, and I think I lose a lot of followers, but I don't care. I've kind of decided not to get into that, but I love Test cricket. I love England matches and all of that. Really, I'm a big fan of the horse racing. Royal Ascot and stuff like that is currently taking place this time of year and all these big events. So yeah, I mean, I'm a football fan, although talking about the seasons closing in, this FIFA club championship that's on at the moment. I mean, surely the players could do without that, couldn't they? There's an example of overkill for me. An event that doesn't need to be played by players that don't really necessarily want to be there, just to fill in the gap in June. Uh, and surely everyone could do with a break from football as well, and to enjoy the new season. The fact that there's no international events like the World Cup or the European Championship this summer would have been quite nice to not have anything in June, I think, for everyone. And I'm a fan of football, so I'm not watching that.
No, I think in Europe we consider it a bit of a Mickey Mouse tournament, a gimmick.
Yeah.
I lived in Seattle for 7 years, and I used to go to the Sounders. I had a season ticket for years at the Seattle Sounders, and they would play in the big stadium, the NFL stadium. So it's what 72,000 capacity, but they would always leave the upper bowl more or less closed. So it was about 40,000 in the lower bowl, but they would always get at least 35, 40,000 every week. So it was good attendance. But for this event,
Mm.
the the numbers are down. Let's just say that. But I think people are burnt out, and yeah, there's too much. Saturation is not a good thing. And
Someone out there must think that we don't see enough football, which is, I don't know where they get that opinion from because it's hard to avoid football, isn't it?
yeah, Gianni Infantino's
Yeah.
doing that is, I think, yeah. So, well, we've had, as I said, a break from snooker. When are you back in the booth?
Yeah, well, Shanghai Masters at the end of July, so I've still got a few more weeks yet. About 5 weeks until that gets underway. It's a good event, that one. It's an invitational event. It's the Chinese edition, of course, of the Masters. It starts the new season, really. I know that there is a ranking event before that, but it feels like that is a big event for the players. O'Sullivan has owned it for years, although he didn't win it last year. So um, that will be the next snooker for me.
And I know the answer, but will you be heading to Shanghai to commentate, or is that done closer to home?
No, we do that from London. We haven't gone to the Asian events for quite some time now. Um, to be honest, we don't really make it very well known, but it does, there's no need for us to be there, actually. I mean, obviously, you get a better it's always better to be commentating by the side of the table. I mean, it is, but it's not necessarily practical to take everybody out there. And um, we commentate off tube, and it's a terrific event. We've got to get up early in the UK to do it, but so have a lot of people in their jobs.
Well, you've been doing this for a little while now. You even
Yeah.
did some commentary on the video game Snooker 19. What was that like? Did you ever think that you'd end up doing commentary on a video game?
No, and David Hendon and myself were involved in that. And the strangest thing is my days of sort of being involved in playing, you know being a gamer, ended years ago with stuff going back so far. But of course, then we had the dreaded COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, and then I bought a copy of the game and started playing it and got quite good at it. And it was weird because I was actually commentating on me. So how bizarre is that? I thought it was a good game actually, but I guess it's like anything else really. Um, the commentaries are all well and good, but sometimes it don't quite match up to what's being done. But I did enjoy that. We had a good experience. We was away for 3 days in somewhere in, I think, Derbyshire. Dave and I went to, and we had to go through 3 days of all these different voiceovers. I just had no voice left at the end. I thought commentating on a long match would be bad enough, but we were literally there for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, speaking endlessly and trying to going over and over and over all this stuff. Although on the shots I play, I seem to be saying the same things almost all the time. So I'm not sure what happened to all the outtakes.
So how does that work? They just give you a script and they say, "Okay, Neil, read sentence 18 now, please." But then
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
don't say it in the correct way, they say, "Okay, just raise your intonation on this word." Like, how detailed do they go? Are
That
they
is
Kubrick
exactly what it
levels
was
of
like.
obsession? Or
Yes, that's exactly what it was like, actually. And if you ever speak to Dave Hendon, I know you have seen him in The Graduate a few times, I'm sure, but he'll tell you the same thing. That was quite yeah, as I say, not a tough 3 days because I say people work hard, but it was yeah, we had to do things over and over again, and I was pleased when it was over, but I enjoyed it.
I mentioned Stanley Kubrick there. I remember during one of the scenes in The Shining, he made them record it 27 times or something like that just because he wasn't. But I think the idea was to stress them out so the characters look more stressed. But yeah, anyway.
The
So,
strange thing about that is moving it on to something very different. When we do work in the snooker studio, I know we're going to talk about stuff later, but when we do, the top of a show, it's almost best not to rehearse it because we do rehearsals and we go through what the questions are going to be asked sometimes. Sometimes it's not it's better just not to do any of that and just almost do it live because firstly it's nice to think you haven't got a chance to do it all over again because you might change one or two words, but also the impact of what you're saying when you've already said it once in a rehearsal to the presenter and co-studio people has gone. So there's something to be said for doing things off the cuff, really.
yeah, I know what you mean. So there's almost less passion in the way you
Yeah,
express it if you've already expressed it. It's just, well, I'm repeating myself now.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
Rob Walker, when he's warming up the crowd before the sessions, he'll do one quick rehearsal. But I think
Yeah,
that's just, and is that different to what
yeah. No, I
what
think
you
that's
do as a
fair enough.
pundit? Or
No, I think that's fair enough. And Rob is the greatest MC we've ever had in snooker. He's the work he puts in at that World Championships is quite incredible. Actually, the fact that he's out there, he knows that some people are going to the Crucible for the first time. It could be a bog standard, if you like, if there's such a thing at the Crucible, a Tuesday morning session where there's no O'Sullivan playing. There's no, it's top players, but it's not the most outstanding session. But he knows for some people that will be their first only visit at the Crucible, and he makes it always very sort of worthwhile for them. I think fulfilling for them. He speaks to them before he warms them up. Does a great job at introducing the players. So yeah, anyone that thinks he's just basically giving out the names of two players and the referee and that's his job done, I think that would be unfair. He's an extremely good MC, the best I've ever known, really.
that would be a simplification, an oversimplification even.
Yeah,
I saw him. Okay, he's good at what he does. He really is, and I love his David Brent style dancing. After the camera pans away from
yeah.
him, he does the fist pumps, and I love that. My wife saw it for the first time recently, and she thought it was brilliant because people like that. People like the fact that he's not embarrassed to be himself. We need more of this in snooker. He,
Yeah,
it was in the Grand Prix final. I, I happened to be out there on holiday anyway, so I picked up a couple of tickets for the final, and there was a bit of a delay before the
yeah.
second session started. And Rob kept the crowd entertained for about 15 minutes. It would be so easy to let some awkward silences creep in there, but he didn't. He managed to keep it going. Obviously, he had a bit of help from soft toys, t-shirts, getting
Yeah.
some kids involved, getting some kids to play a few little shots. But he didn't miss a beat. And that is not easy to do. Not just anyone can do that. That
He's
was
very
impressive
good.
work.
He's very good. He's very hardworking. He is Alan Partridge. Let's be honest. I mean, there's no getting away from it. And I'd say that to him, and he knows it really. In lots of his ways, he is literally Alan Partridge. So, but yeah, he's an expert in his field, I would say.
And some would say that you are an expert in your field. How did this part of your career come about? Is this something you planned when you were still playing, or did it just happen by luck? Who brought this to the table?
Well, I always was keen on doing it. I always thought it was a good idea. Um, I was doing a lot of broadcasting for a bookmaker on snooker previews and then horse racing, etc. While my career ended. But I actually did firstly commentate in, I think it was about 1988. It's my very first commentary. No one will remember it. I don't. It's out there somewhere, I suppose, with the late John Pullman, who was a brilliant commentator. He was a real voice of the game back then, you know. Uh, Less is more, one of those. Hardly said a word, actually, but what he did say was usually worth hearing. And I went there one evening. It was one of Barry's events. It was the Matchroom event on Sky. I think, from memory, I think Steve Davis would have been playing. And I was taken into the commentary box with John Pullman, a bit nervous, I must admit. I knew John, but he said, "Well, welcome into the commentary box. You're going to meet the most important person now. I'm going to bring him in." So I thought, well, okay, this could be the sound engineer or the uh, match director or something like that. It turned out it was the runner, i.e., the person who was going to bring the drinks. He goes, "You know the score, every frame." Large Scotch, he said, for me, and whatever Mr. Foles will have. I said, well, I mean, I'm partial to a little drink, but I was never going to do that in there. So he goes, and if the frame takes longer than 15 minutes, come in at 15-minute intervals instead, And anyway, by the end of the night, he'd had about, I mean, I think the match went 6-4 or something. So he'd had a lot of double scotches. He never slurred a word, though. It was amazing, really. I mean, I thought this was what they all did, the commentators, and maybe they did back then. He was basically drinking the whole evening. We had a nice evening, actually. I enjoyed it, and maybe if you listen back to some of the old commentaries from the 70s and 80s, there's not a lot being said, and I wonder if maybe they all enjoy a little drink. I know Ted Lowe was keen on the odd tipple as well, um, but as I say, maybe that's where the old less is more came from. He let me do all the talking. He closed out the frames, but that was my first experience. But then I got a phone call, many years later from Sky asking me would I like to do the Scottish Open, which I did. I got involved in that, and I had some really enjoyable years working for Sky on their various events um, but of course, and then when they stopped doing tournaments, which I think Jimmy White won the last one, beat Paul Hunter in the final, they ended up doing the Premier League, and which I travelled around the country working on that. It never quite took off in the same way Premier League darts did, and they packed it all in at the end of the year when they had to get rid of an outside broadcast because Stephen Lee had been banned, and they decided that I think they'd had enough of snooker. Reading between the lines, it felt that there was a little link there, not blaming anyone in particular, but didn't help matters. And they've never covered snooker since, which I find interesting. But had some good years with them. Then I did the BBC for a number of years, and some really happy years now with Eurosport Discovery, TNT. What that's their most recent name. TNT is what they're now called, and of course ITV, which sadly appears to be coming to an end at the end of the year. The ITV coverage is surprisingly and disappointingly going to end, but I've been very lucky to be involved in all these things for a long time, and I can't think there's been any part of it I haven't really enjoyed because it's so much easier to commentate on something than play. I mean, I know snooker. I'd like to think, but you take snooker home with you. You always do that. You play your match, even when you're playing well, playing badly. You take it all home with you. You carry it around. You wake up in the middle of the night thinking about your cue action and all these different things. But when you're commentating, you can put that microphone down, go to the bar or go to your room, and you don't think over. You think about what you're going to do the next day, but you don't spend all night fretting over it because you're not playing anymore. So from that side of it, it's a lot more stress free.
If you were to make a mistake in commentary,
Oh,
no
mate,
one will really.
plenty.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, not many, but yeah. But I've said that a few times on this podcast that I like the honesty with which you commentate, and I've people will be sick of hearing this, but when you say something like "that's a dreadful shot," for me, that's important. You will know more than the vast majority of viewers at home, if not all the viewers at home. So for the viewer to know that it's not just bad luck, it's poor planning or poor execution of the shot. I mean, it's important that we know that, and if we can't trust your opinion, then whose opinion can we trust? Is it hard to draw that line? Because you can, it is possible to go a bit hard on players, but
Mm.
you need to be honest with the viewers as well, without patronising. It's how do you draw that line?
Well, put it this way: there's not a player out there that's not missed a black off the spot or tried to roll behind a bolt color and not reached, right? We all make mistakes. So you can't really be too critical of that because these things happen, right? But it's when you make a poor decision that you make a tactical error, you miss something that's obvious. Your observations of the table are wrong, like you play a safety shot and leave a plant on that you could have looked at. There's certain things I think players can be criticised for, not missing balls. We all miss balls. The greatest ever players miss easy balls. It happens. That's not it. It's just decision making. Um, Certain things that happen in the game you can't help yourself really. But the problem there I have is that I can remember a few years ago at the Crucible, I was doing it was the last year Stephen Hendry played actually, 2012. He played John Higgins, beat John. It was the round after he'd made the 147. He beat John. The middle session. I've spoken about this before. They were both poor. I mean, I've spoken to Stephen about it. I actually spoke to Stephen at the time in one of the breaks. He said, "How bad is this?" I said, "Well, yeah." And I remember being a little critical of them both. Now, obviously, not again, not because they're missing balls, just the way it was going. It was a bad session of two of the greatest players I think I've ever seen. And I remember being a little critical of those. And I got the earlier days of social media, perhaps. Um, what right have you got to criticise anything that John Higgins does or Stephen Hendry does? What did you ever do at the game? Well, I get that, and they're probably right, but what it really means is hardly anyone's allowed to commentate on those two. Then it's a bit like if Davis played Hendry back in the day, no one can be in the commentary box because no one's done as much as those two. You're allowed to say things, you're allowed to offer opinions. No one's saying that you sit there and think you're a better player than them. Um, and mistakes are made. And I'll tell you another extreme of that. I mean, I've had so much fun watching Ronnie O'Sullivan over the years. He's always on. His matches are always on. Um, the greatest I've ever watched, actually. But I remember doing a match only about 4 or 5 years ago where he played. I don't remember who he played now. I think he won. But afterwards, I had two separate um, social media interactions. One was, "You are such a crawler. You love Ronnie O'Sullivan so much. It's embarrassing the way you crawl around him." And the next message I got said, "Why do you hate O'Sullivan so much? You can tell by your commentaries you hate him." So what does that tell you? That tells you that your words can be interpreted in two completely different ways.
Yep.
One thought that I was O'Sullivan's biggest fanboy, and the other person thought I disliked him, and my commentary was biased against him. And that's watching and listening to the same stuff. So you can't please people all the time. You have to be true to yourself and say it how you see it. You'll not always be right, and that's okay. As long as people aren't rude, I don't mind. People are very welcome to tell me they don't, not saying it right. I mean, over the years, I have had three different players message me and tell me they didn't like what I said about them. Um, in a way, I actually don't mind that. One of them was quite. I won't mention the names; it wouldn't be right. But One of them sent me a message correcting me, said, well, it wasn't like this. My build up to this tournament was X, Y, Z. It was a long message. And I thought, okay, I'm glad you told me that. I didn't realize you had personal stuff going on. I'll bear that in mind. Somebody else was quite angry with me. We made up completely. You'll never guess who it was, so I'm not going to tell you. It's not an obvious person like a Ronnie or anybody, but it was a leading player. Didn't like what I said. He hadn't heard it live, by the way. He'd only heard it through somebody else. And another player who I'm very good friends with also did it, and he hadn't heard what I'd said live. Someone had told him something, and he'd taken it on in his power to have a dig at me. But I don't mind in a way. If anyone's got a problem, I would rather they told me, because what's the harm in it all? You know, what is the harm? You can't please all the people. You just have to say what you think. I don't think there's anything worse listening to sport, and I love sport. If you listen to the commentators, they just completely sit on the fence all the time, never offer an opinion. What is that? I mean, what does that bring to the table? Not much, I don't think.
It's just empty noise at that point. It's just filling audio gaps for the sake of it.
Yeah,
I listen to. I think commentary is a massive part of snooker,
yeah,
and the difference is if there's a match on the streaming service, one of them has the commentary, and another two, three matches don't. It's very, very likely I'll pick the commentary match. Very,
yeah,
very likely. And I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast. My first real memory of caring about snooker was the '94 final. And after Jimmy had missed that black, Stephen was clearing up the table, and Dennis Taylor, who I think is a great voice, by the way, he said something, and it has influenced the way I feel about sports commentary overall. I'm delighted for Stephen, but I could cry for this gentleman sitting in the chair there.
yeah, yeah.
I
I
thought
think
in one line, it's so powerful.
absolutely no. I mean that's it. That's it. And one thing, excuse me, I do know also is that when people are critical of your commentary, it's usually because you talk too much. No one ever says you're not saying enough. I've never heard that. Not one person's ever messaged me, or no, nobody ever from behind the scenes. Any whoever I've been working with has said you need to say more. I know that in sport these days there is a tendency for people to say more. If you're watching cricket now, they speak over the ball being bowled and lots of stuff. It's as if you have to completely fill the air with chat. When really, I think for the most part, people just want to watch the game, and they want you to add your little snippets here and there, and your bits here or there. They just want to watch the game in peace and quiet. They'd miss you if you weren't there completely, but they don't want you babbling on about all kinds of stuff. Um, I mean, you go back to that '85 final, the black that Steve Davis missed, the thin cut to the left corner. Ted Lowe just said no, like that. That's all he said. He didn't need to say any more than that.
Yeah,
And he
one
said it's
word.
quite unbelievable. Earlier in that little exchange on the black, um, Dennis missed a black up into the green pocket, and Jim Meadowcroft paused. And as he got back to his chair, he said that was the biggest shot of his life. That's enough. You haven't got to over egg the cake. I mean, I understand that you have to say. I think maybe the more tension there is, maybe that's the time to say less and less, really, because players really, spectators really want to watch the game. If there's a very quiet period where players are rolling into the bunch, and balls are being replaced, and that takes forever, as we know, and all these kind of things, that's the time to be a bit more anecdotal. If you've got something to say outside of what's happening on the table, that would be the best time. But no one's really got it right. No one's got it right. It's never going to appeal to everybody. Whatever you do, someone's not going to like. Others are. So I think there is timing in commentary, when to say something and when not to.
Recently at the French Open, the men's final, during the deciding set tiebreak, the commentators didn't say a word. So
You
these
know,
two,
I
they different.
noticed that.
Yeah,
I noticed that. I know it's funny you should say that, because I was going to mention it. I watched that and they didn't say very much at all. Um, and I thought it worked. And they did speak, obviously, but I thought, hang on a minute, have I lost the commentary here? Because I haven't heard anything for a while. But it didn't really need much to be added to the pictures. It was so dramatic that the fact that it went to a tiebreak, albeit it was a one-sided tiebreak, wasn't it? Um, But I did notice that and found it interesting.
It's that moment, this is obviously the climax of a match. Less is more. But these two have been slugging it out for 5 hours. It's not about the commentator at that point. It's about these two guys giving everything, leaving everything out there on the court.
Well, it's
They
never about,
deserve our
yeah,
attention.
yeah, absolutely, Dan. It's never about the commentator. That's the other thing. It's never about the commentator. It shouldn't be. The commentator is there to talk about what's happening on the table. It should never be about anyone's ego or anything else. I don't think there's many people. I'm not aiming this at anybody. I don't see too many people in snooker with that problem. I think in other sports I've heard a few where they trying to make it all about themselves a little bit, but it should never be. But as I say, it's like anything else. Occasionally you get a little bit excited and do speak too much when you're out there. I've done it many a time. um, People either like it or they don't. Sometimes early in the morning, they don't like hearing you wittering on. If you're doing the Shanghai Masters at 6 a.m., they've just got up and they're having their cornflakes or a cup of tea and they want to watch the match and they don't really want to hear, a million different things coming your way.
And to go back to a point you made there, you commentated on Stephen Hendry, John Higgins, and one of the
Yeah,
commenters, well, what have you ever done?
yeah.
When you work with someone, well, I'll use Dave Hendon as an example. Now, in all the interactions I've had with Dave Hendon, I still don't know if he's a good player or not. Don't tell me. But he wasn't a pro player, so I think it's fair to assume that he's not as good as the players on the table. Let's just say that. But he is a respected journalist. He's a respected writer. He has a book coming out in September, I believe.
He
I've
does.
already I've already pre-ordered my copy. And he clearly loves the sport. And I've asked a few commentators about this. I think there is a difference between what you can offer and what he can offer. How do you work in tandem with someone like that? Or is it easier to work with Dave rather than another former player or a current player?
No, I think that's the best way. I mean, if you go back to my early commentary with Sky, I was always paired up with Clive Everton, or almost always. There were a number of reasons for that. One is because Willie Thorne and Clive wouldn't work together, so they had their differences. I mean, it's not a secret. I'm not giving away any trade secrets. You never heard those two commentate together because whether it be on the BBC or on Sky, they just would they couldn't be in the same room together. Basically, they had their problems. So I would be paired up with Clive, which worked well for me because Clive was clearly the old school of complete anchor or lead commentator, whatever you want to say. And he would, he followed all he only didn't never wasted words. And I think that, in the modern day, I'm happier working with. Certainly, I think Dave is excellent. I think he's as good as he's as good as it gets when it comes to lead commentary. The other two lead commentators I work with, Phil Yates, everyone knows Phil. He's a good friend of mine. He's good as well. I like Phil. I've worked with him for a long time, actually, the longest of anybody, I think, even including when Clive was around. And Philip Studd, I think, is very underrated. Excellent broadcaster, works very hard, does his research. So they're the three I work with. I think they're very good. I do prefer it in a way. I've done lead commentary myself. Normally. But there's normally a reason why I'm doing it, and because it's one of the other lead commentators can't be there or whatever. With the BBC, it would be two snooker people would go into a booth and they would divvy it up. Who's lead commentator? You do one frame, you top and tail one frame, I'll do the next. Look, it's fine. It doesn't really work for me, not in the same way. I don't know. Other people might disagree with that, um, but I prefer it when you know your roles, and but mine is to talk about the shots and the analysis. I'd like to think I could do other stuff, but you don't tread on each other's toes. You know your roles. I try not to overdo the stats either. I'd like to think that I've got all that information, and I do follow it all closely, all the rankings, everything. But I don't think the people want to hear two people, you know, spouting out a load of stats. If someone's going to give out information, numbers and rankings, etc., it should be probably the lead commentator, whereas the color commentator, analyst, whatever, probably talk about the match and a few other little things. But you know, uh, it's not to say you shouldn't know all this information, but I wouldn't want to use it all the time. There's going to be a time and a place for it. So I prefer that setup. As I say, I think Dave's excellent. By the way, I have he has sent me he sent me the book. I have read the book, or there's certainly a transcript of it, and it's not just saying this. I've got no shares in it. I think it's excellent. It's good. It's well worth a read. Terrific book, in my opinion, the best I've known on snooker. So you'll enjoy it.
I think it's out in September, I believe.
I believe so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to read it already. So yeah, that's it's all pots of gold. It's going to be very good, very good. That's just my opinion on it anyway.
Last question on the commentary. Because you played the game for a long time and you've been around the game, the snooker world for such a long time, how hard is it to treat the matches objectively? Because you will have pre-existing relationships with player A or B and maybe both, and you'll know this about their game. As you mentioned, that sometimes you don't know everything, and a player has said, "Well, you don't know this about my preparation for this
Yeah.
tournament," and you can never really know that, of course. But I'll give you an example. One of the most popular matches at the World Championship this year was John Higgins, Mark Williams, and it was a classic. I have a slightly controversial opinion on this, I think. I think the John Higgins Zhao Gudong match was a better match. And I think
Okay.
the star power of Mark Williams, John Higgins, the fact that maybe it might be the last time we see them face each other at the Crucible, I think that added to the aura. But if you were to put faceless avatars on these players, I thought the Zhao Gudong John Higgins match was better. So the reason I bring that up is, does your knowledge of the players and does your relationship with the players, does it make a difference? And do you have to use that, or do you try to eliminate that aspect when you're commentating?
I try to. Yeah. I can't think of many players on the tour who I don't like very much. There might be one or two, and I'm certainly not going to mention them. And I can't even think who that would be right now. But yeah, you've got to try and be objective. I always think that whoever you're trying to speak about, right? If whether it be a top player playing a newcomer, and the newcomer might have little chance, you have to remember that maybe his mother and father and family members are sitting at home listening to that because they don't necessarily hear him in commentary very much because this player wouldn't have played it on the TV much. So you know you you don't want to be too critical of anyone, do you? But because it's tough out there. Um, but as far as there's one or two players I have a soft spot for on the tour, but in some ways it could be that you go the other way with those players because you know them so well um, that you're a little more hard on those, little harder on those, than you would be players that you'd have no feeling for. You kind of feel a little bit more critical. A strange analogy to that would be, that the business with Tatiana Wollaston and Ben Wollaston, you know, but when Ben Wollaston's playing a match, Tatiana can't referee it, can she? Clearly, because it would be. I don't. If I was playing Ben, I actually think that Tatiana, be happy for her to referee because I think she'd be want to be seen to be absolutely scrupulously fair. She'd probably punish him more. She wouldn't be favouring him, would she? Because it would be the wrong thing to do. You know what I mean? As if to say, I'm gonna, uh, I figured that she would be scrupulously fair and more thorough on a match like that than clearly, then it's never going to happen that she officiates on a match she's playing in. So my reason to compare that thing is it's a bit like if you've got a really good pal who's playing, it could be that you're actually a little bit more critical of them than you would be who they're playing because you know them so well. So that might be the way it works.
Okay. Well, I think now I'm thinking about this. Would she go harder on her husband just
I
to
think
sort of
so.
prove that? Well, no, no, seriously. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that outside pressure to prove that I'm definitely not favouring him.
I think
It's
that if he went out to the toilet too long and didn't come back at the mid-session, she'd dock him a frame. That's what I think, just to prove that she was fair.
yeah,
I don't know.
from
I think she's a brilliant. She's a great referee, by the way. I
she
think she should
is.
do a well finalist. I mean, I have had that conversation with her. I said you should be doing Ben's matches because I know that you'd be, absolutely scrupulously fair, and if anything, you might just slightly take it too far and be. favouring his opponent in the sort of to be seen to be absolutely fair. But there you go. I've kind of got away from what you were saying there, but I couldn't help it.
Rambling is fine. Rambling is fine. But Ben, he had a good season. He made
He
it to the
did.
Crucible this year. Overall, last season, well, he ended up beating Mark Selby in the Crucible, who he had a good season. 2 ranking event victories for Mark Selby. Who else had 2? Neil Robertson,
Yeah.
John Higgins. I think Judd Trump only won 2 ranking events, if I'm not mistaken. But well, events 2 and 3 in terms of prize money. Obviously, not the
Yeah,
World
well, he won in
Championship.
Saudi and he won the UK, didn't he? Two mammoth events, you know. As far as Selby, he's kind of hoodwinked us a bit, hasn't he, the last couple of seasons? Because, you know, he was gone into the World Championships and people thought he could win it. And we thought, well, okay, 2 years ago, he's playing Joe O'Connor, fellow Leicester lad. He's going to be too strong for him. He probably practices with him and beats him. Lost to him. I thought, well, it's not going to happen again. Surely he's going to beat Ben. I mean, most people would have thought that Ben Wollaston uh, would have been a good draw for Mark. I don't think the friendship comes into it. I'm not buying into that, but you know that was probably the shock of the tournament in a way, wasn't it? That Ben won that match. So Mark has kind of made me wonder: will he ever win it again now? Because I always felt he might. He's can't get over the first fence. It seems to me now. Um, but of course, next year it'll be the same. It'll be someone that, if he's in the tournament after a week, he's probably going to be the man to beat, isn't he? So he's interesting. Obviously, Neil Robertson. Good to see him returning to form. I'm pleased about that actually because he had a bad spell the year before. He's got his game back. Although again, will he ever be world champion? I'm starting to think not now. I always felt he would. As far as John Higgins, well, remarkable. I mean, the fact that he won those 2 events, he's playing as well as anybody going into the championship. And of course, you know, it was only Mark Williams that did for him in the end. He could have potentially been in that final the way things were going. And you're right about John. The match with Gudong was an excellent one, although my own view is it wasn't better than the match with Williams. But you know, yeah, it's just that just the way things go, really. Williams then went on to beat Judd, but that as far as John is concerned, he was the one of the top three or the class of '92 that looked to be his game was falling away a little bit, but now he looks probably the strongest of the three. It may be. I know that Mark beat him in the end, but John looks fine going into the new season, doesn't he?
The confidence the first win gave him, it can't really understand it really, can't really relate to it. But after so long without a ranking event victory and so many close defeats in finals, that tour championship defeat against Neil Robertson, that one must have hurt from 9-4 up to lose 10-9.
Yeah.
And I think, did he say something like, I just can't get over the line in these big matches anymore? And when he says that in public, okay, maybe it's heat of the moment, maybe he's just angry at himself. But to say something like that, it's a strong statement. But he's kind of proven himself wrong a few years down the line,
Yeah.
which is nice to
There
see.
there are, but there's so many sliding doors moments, aren't there? I mean, you think about um, that match with Zach Surety in the semi-finals, which he won, which he had no right to win that match. Zach Surety,
True.
really good player. I'm going to say he chucked it away actually, but I don't want to be hard on him because he's a great lad and he's been through a lot. And I think he would say that himself. And I know he said he wasn't over it for a while. Had he not beaten had he lost that match, and who's to say he would have won the tour championship? I'd have been a little surprised had he done so, really, um, because it would have been another defeat, which had been disappointing for him. So you get a moment like that. He'd lost so many matches he should have won, and now he had one that went the other way, and it gave him that same sort of buzz in reverse. I think.
I'm thinking now, I think he still would have qualified, but had he lost in the semi-finals in China, would he have made the tour championship? I think he
Good
would
point.
have.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember exactly now
Can't
looking
remember.
back on that score. But yeah, I mean that tour championship was a hard event clearly to get in. But yeah, he went on to win it and I never thought that he would didn't necessarily play very well at Sheffield because such a big run of matches leading up to it. But he did play well at Sheffield. It all got a little bit too much for him in the end and whether you think that was or wasn't the best match of the championship or not, the match with Mark Williams, I thought was a tremendous game. Actually, I've got to be honest. The fact that it ended up on the black in the last frame, um, it was, in my opinion, a really good match.
The first round match against Joe O'Connor, I was in the Crucible for that. That definitely was not the match of the tournament. Joe was the
Okay,
better player, but he just missed a couple of little chances. And John, it's that experience, that he still has that ruthlessness, and he punished a few mistakes. I think he won 10-7 in the end. But Joe should. Had Joe taken his chances, he should have won the match. But
isn't
that's the
it?
difference.
It's a little bit of a rematch of the final they played. Um, in China. I thought that match played out almost in the identical way. Really, with Joe, probably should have won a lot more frames than he did, but that's experience. And in John Higgins, you've got someone who is the hard man of snooker. He makes every shot an event. He really does put everything into it, and it's still a credit to the game, as are all of those three that class of '92. They're amazing players.
And they're good for the sport in a lot of ways, actually. It shows that if you can last that long, then you've got to be doing something right. I always considered it like Gareth Barry in the Premier League.
Yeah,
Is he the greatest player in the Premier League? No. But he clearly was all right. He played 600 odd games in the Premier League, so he did something right. But these guys are winning trophies, 100 ranking events
yeah.
between them now, I believe.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's
and they've kind of all towed each other along. I think had there been one of them, maybe only O'Sullivan, maybe it would have been difficult for him. But they've all seen what the other ones can do. You know, um, they'll be at the end of this year. They'll all be over 50. Ronnie isn't until December the 5th, but they'll all be 50 plus, which is too old, really, isn't it, to be a top snooker player? We were always told. Whether any of those three will be world champion again, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I
would
mean,
agree.
do you know? I don't know of the three who is most likely, and I figure it's probably O'Sullivan, even though he didn't play very well at the championship. I didn't think this year. I know he got his way through to the semi-finals before he got hammered, but hammered by Jin Tong. But of the three, probably O'Sullivan. But I'm starting to wonder if, in snooker now, the younger players are going to come through. You had Kyron, you had Luca, and now you've got Zhao Jintong. Players, you know, well, those two are just, two of them were under 30 when they won it. The other one's just over 30, in his early 30s. So maybe for that whole championship and everything that's required, maybe those guys that are 50 now, unsurprisingly, might be too old to win it.
But you mentioned three winners there. So, yeah, and they are younger guys. Judd Trump is a couple of years older than that. He was easily one of the favourites going in. But again, it's another season where he hasn't won a second world championship.
Mm.
Dave Hendon is a staunch defender of Judd Trump's record. Okay, it would be nice if he had world titles 2 and 3 just to eliminate any doubt. But is he one of the greats for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, it's a different game now in a way, in that, the last 7 or 8 years, snooker has become there's lots of events of more importance now than there were with the other, if you like, people on that list of greats. It was all about the UK, the Masters, the World Championships. Judd won in Saudi. He's won the Northern Irish 3 times. He's won the German multiple times. All these events now were not on the calendar, maybe not prioritized by everybody. I think Judd will be world champion again, but I did think that maybe it would have happened by now. I've got to be honest, and I don't think I feel that Neil Robertson won't win, as I said earlier, but I do feel that Judd will win again. But maybe the year that Judd wins it, the next will be one where he's had quite a poor season. Where he hasn't been winning everything leading into it. I don't know why, but it seems to me that players who have done a lot of winning and a lot of playing sometimes go into the championship a little bit burnt out, and usually he's burnt out because he's won a lot of stuff. I do feel he'll win it again. Yes, in answer to your question, he's definitely one of the greats. He's not the greatest, but he's one of the greats, and he probably needs another few more triple crowns. Certainly needs a couple more world titles to be elevated to the very next level. But he is already one of the best players we've seen.
And Kyron Wilson was defending champion. He had a fantastic season, 4 ranking event victories, the final of the Masters as well. I mean, he did okay, but then when it came to the one he really wanted. He wanted to be the guy to beat the Crucible curse, but he fell at the
Yeah,
first hurdle. Maybe it just backs up your theory that if you're playing too well during the season, you need to peak at the right time. But it shows how hard it is, even to win it once. You know,
yeah. Oh,
so
anyone that wins it once has done well. It's just that, yeah, that first day, I said all along, I remember saying to a few people, bearing in mind I didn't know he was going to be playing at the Crucible. When he was playing so well, I said to, I think, Stephen Hendry, I said he'll get dumped on day one at the Crucible. And at the time, it seemed unthinkable because he kept beating Judd in finals. But that's the game for you, isn't it? You can come unstuck, and it could happen to Xiao Jintong as well next year. By the way, I'm not necessarily saying he'll lose on day one, but he could easily not progress in the same way as he did this year. And I'd be surprised if he won it 2 years in a row from having never won it before. Yeah, he led 6-3 in that match against Li Peifan. I think 6-2, and then in the evening, Peifan was terrific. And when it got close, that's when the pressure really got to him. And it's a different kind of pressure, isn't it? There's one thing playing in the World Championships, round one, getting close, but as first-time defending champion, it got to him a little bit. And it shouldn't detract from the kind of season he's had, but it would have certainly you know, Lepe fan, good luck to him. But had Kyron stayed in that top half, it would have been very interesting to see what was going to happen because Chris Wakelin looked like he was struggling a little bit when he played at Jintong. O'Sullivan was never right; he kept changing his tip and his ferrule, everything. Um, but had Kyron been in there, it would certainly would have sort of stiffened up the sort of the top half of the draw a little bit. But s- things fall into place, the stars align sometimes, and it did for Xiao Jintong.
what impact is this going to have on snooker? On the table, it's a fantastic achievement, clearly. 111 frames. Like, this is a marathon. Taking away the controversy, what do you think this will do for snooker as a global sport?
Well, I think it's a good thing. Look, I know a few people are still saying that he shouldn't have been in it. He shouldn't. All these different things. There are people on that banned list at the top of the list. I'm not going to mention names, but you'll know who they are, who I don't ever want to see playing on the tour again, and I don't think we ever will see again. And so if you follow in the game without mentioning names, you're not going to see these guys. They've done too much wrong, and they must go. In the case of Jintong, he wasn't uh, suspended for fixing matches. He knew a little bit about what was going on. He knew, and he was rightly banned, I think. But what do you want to do? How far do you want to take this? Is it like a life sentence all the time for these people? I was pleased to see him back. I think everyone deserves a second chance, really, and he's taken it. And also, I mean, really, would we want to see such a talent? Locked away from the game for so long that when they come back, they're not going to be the same player. Uh, and the other thing about it, and aside from all the controversy, we've seen a qualifier win the world championship again now. I mean, no one would have thought a qualifier could win it. Had you mentioned the qualifier, you might have thought maybe a Jack Lazowski could win it, but even that seems a long way off, or one or two others. But I think it's got to be good for the game because in Ding Junhui, I don't think he'll ever be champion now. I didn't think he would for a while, but China probably needs a world champion, or just will add that they've got the men's and women's snooker world champions right now. So, anyone that thinks we're just waiting for China to take the game over, they're a long way towards doing so. And surely with Xiao Jintong winning, um, there's going to be even more young Chinese players looking for fame and fortune and are going to take up the game.
And yeah, it would appear that the future could be bright. And I think not just in China, across Asia, it could spark something. And if we get players from even more countries, more representation from different nations, this can't be a bad thing. If it grows
No,
the sport,
no, I agree with you. I agree with you, and I think look, I'm an English player, but I think we've had it too easy for too long. I mean, don't forget, even for the Chinese events, the qualifiers are still played over here in the
yeah,
UK. Now I understand why, because they're more British-based players, and that's fair enough. I'm not saying everyone should have to go to China and play, but for the Chinese players, they get benefits in. A lot of them have been receiving wild cards for years, but they also have to turn their life around and play. and live in the UK in academies and all of that, and you might live 10 minutes away from Wuhan, where the event's being played, but you've got to travel to the UK to qualify for it. So that's just the truth of it, isn't it? So it's not easy for these guys, but I do feel that, like you say, I know that you're speaking about what a wider area than just China, but I think China is clearly we're going to see more players from China, but we are seeing, various other players. There'll be three Polish players on the tour now, as well, which has got to be good, and Ersin Bakker's back on the tour from Switzerland. Lots of places where snooker is very big. So yeah, the growth of the game. The game is in better shape on that score than it's ever been.
I'm going to try and force a segue here. So you mentioned qualifiers. A lot of those happen in Leicester, in the
Yeah,
Mattioli Arena,
the home of snooker.
the home of snooker. Who was it said? Was it Nick Metcalf who said that?
He may have done. Yeah, may
I
have
think,
done. Yeah,
yeah.
he may have done.
But also in the Mattioli Arena, when? Next week, the Championship League kicks off.
Yeah.
We'll have a new season. What are your thoughts on the Championship League overall? And do you think it's a good way to start the season?
Well, I suppose if you're going to play it anywhere, it's probably got to be in the middle of the summer because I don't think it would really. Um, that event for the prize fund and short matches, etc., is not really going to, and no one's going to be interested in between the Masters and sort of the World Grand Prix, are they? Um, so yeah, look, it's not harming anyone, is it? Being where it is, it's right in the middle of summer. Yeah, I've heard people say that the Championship League, if it wasn't going to be on, there wouldn't be any other snooker. Well, that does apply to this one for sure, but I don't necessarily agree that that applies to the invitational one that's in January. But as far as I'm concerned, it's fine. Although I did notice that very few top 16 players are in it. None of the top eight have entered it. The
That's
number
right.
one
Yep.
seed is actually Barry Hawkins, who's so I think there's just a handful of top 16 players in it. So they're seeing it as their break from the game, and they're entitled to that. And it's an opportunity for plenty of others. There'll be lots of top ups and some good new. If you're a newcomer, you're not going to miss out on it. But it's not an event that you will be talking about. um, it's a bit like when the football season starts and the Community Shield is played at Wembley. You think, well, this is going to be great. The football's back. But then who cares who won the Community Shield when the season gets underway? So I feel it's a bit like that. I'm not having a go at it because the event's on, and I'll probably have a little peek at it. So it's probably a gentle introduction to the new season. Fair enough.
Well, it's like the Community Shield. If you win it, it's a trophy. If you lose
Yeah.
it, it's just a
Who
friendly.
cares?
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
you can be
just on
selective
the
after the fact.
just on the Championship League, the Invitational one. People say, "Oh, yeah, well, there's not going to be anything else on because that week anyway." But actually, that's because the Championship League is usually the first event put in the calendar. Now, if you think about last year, the event all the way through January, then they had the Saudi event as well. They tried to shoehorn in. So pre-Christmas, you had qualifiers for two events, and in between it, the Saudi event was on. So players were actually playing a qualifier at the start of the week in the UK somewhere. I don't think it was they were played at the Mattioli. They were played somewhere in the UK. They would have to go to Saudi and then come back and play another qualifier. I mean, Mark Williams came back from Saudi and lost his qualifier straight away. So maybe had that Invitational Championship League not been sort of imprinted in the calendar so early, there would have been more of a way to make the season less frantic, and the German Masters often suffers a little bit as a consequence of those qualifiers being pre-Christmas. I think it's because of visas, etc. But you know, sometimes the season is a little bit congested as it is.
Yeah, the German Masters, well, obviously it had a lot of attention. The qualifiers had a lot of attention last season because of the Max Selt outburst. All right, he shouldn't have done it, but he apologized. We can't crucify him for that. But and as far as I know, he apologized pretty quickly afterwards. But I always said that his embarrassment would be punishment enough. You're not going to ban him for that kind of behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, against Artemis Zizins, wasn't it the match you're speaking about where he got the fluke?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I don't think Matt covered himself in glory. He's someone that divides opinions. I'll be honest, I've had only a sort of a few conversations with him. I've sat across the table at dinner with him once or twice. We've been on away with Stephen and Henry, who's good friends. I think he's okay, good guy, but uh, I don't really think he behaved very well there. But what I will say about Matt Selt is he's now been taken off the board, hasn't he? So there's obviously something not right going on there. So I don't really want to say anything about him because I'm not sure what is going on in his world. I hope he's okay. But as far as that match is concerned, he didn't cover himself in glory, and I say that to his face.
So the German Masters for me is always one of the events to look forward to. I was in Berlin in February or January and February. This time I'm going again to the final this year. What are the events that you look forward to as a commentator and a pundit?
Well, funny you should say that. That is one of my favourite events. I mean, uh, you know, anyone who's a snooker fan, and you see there's some people around the tour who are real fans of the game. Um, and I say, look, have you been to the Temperature for the last weekend? No. I said, well, you've got to go because it is just an amazing atmosphere. And I think people are over egg atmospheres at sport. You've got the Crucible, it doesn't even need to be mentioned really. Well, you know what it's like there. But the temperature is incredible. I mean, it's not over the years. They've not always had the players they've wanted there. They've not had O'Sullivan there at finals weekend for a while now, and it's not always who they want. Although Kyron's got a terrific record there. He seems to embrace it all, and the crowds love it. So it's one of my favourite events for sure. As far as the others, the Masters is still big, isn't it? No doubt about that. The Masters got better and better, so I'm a big fan of that event and a few others. I mean, I think Northern Ireland is terrific. That's another pulsating atmosphere. I think it's nice to go to venues, like you do in Belfast, the Waterfront Hall, where snooker's really appreciated. It's once a year. Snooker's in town, and people are going to enjoy it. And there's a very passionate part of the world for fans. They've had some greats of the game. They've got Mark Allen now, and of course Alex and Dennis have been from those parts of the world. So they're sort of steeped in the game, and I think that counts for a lot. Maybe that's not quite the same at the Temperature, but there's a real insatiable appetite for snooker. In Germany, and I think that we're reminded of it if we didn't already know when we excuse me when we go to the Temperature.
You mentioned Mark Allen there, actually, just to change topic. I think Mark Allen will be a player to watch this season. Okay, I don't think he was that bad last season, but he had a disappointing end to the season. He didn't make it to the Tour Championship, I believe, and he Sanjing Yi in the first round at the Crucible didn't put up much of a fight, and Chris Wakelin beat him with some ease, we'll say. I think he'll come back strong this season. Who are you looking out for this season?
Yeah, well, Mark Allen, look, I thought Wakelin played amazingly well in that match. He had a spell in the middle of that match where I still will remember the three bolt colours he rolled into the left middle pocket, the green, the brown, and the yellow at different stages when almost anyone else would have played safe. He had an absolutely fantastic match to beat him. He's 15 at the end of season rankings, Mark Allen. I mean, I know at the start of the season, the end of the season rankings might not mean a lot, but he has had a quiet spell, and I think his problem is he doesn't know quite whether to stick or twist with his game. He's trying to be more forensic about things, and it's not worked. But he just ran into a good player at the top of his game in the Crucible. He'll be fine. I've got no doubt about that. And it'd be an interesting season for some of the others, really. For the likes of Mark Selby, is he going to be able to keep going the way he's going? I'm sure he'll pop up and win a couple of events. But it seems that Mark has got the slightly, I could be wrong about this, but the events, the Triple Crown events, he seems to go into his shell now and struggle in those, whether it's become a psychological issue or what. I mean, I just don't know. If you're looking for, a player to come through, you'd like to think that Cesar Wee would be someone coming through. I'm not sure he's quite gone on from where he was, but now that Xiao Xintong has done what he's done, there's no reason why he shouldn't take the lead. I mean, the match in Wuhan in that semi-final where he beat Judd Trump, it's got to be one of my favourite matches of the season. Not because Judd lost, I'm a big fan of Judd, but he was sensational. He made a 147, other big breaks, and he took Judd apart. Now that was only in probably October of last year, maybe September. Um, if he's got that form in there somewhere, and you think he didn't even play well at the Crucible and went quite deep, O'Sullivan did for him, then I'd like to think that he could be the player to keep an eye on for the new season, and hopefully he'll be able to raise his game a little bit to the standards I think he's capable of.
It seems strange that he is one of the Chinese players who hasn't won a ranking event yet. Wu Yize is another young up and coming Chinese player
Yeah,
also. Well, he made two finals last season, lost them both. But when you see Lei Pei Fan, who was not one of the more fancied players, he won a ranking event. No one can take that from him. Xiao Zhintong obviously won the biggest event of all. I think most people would have put a bet on Si Wei and Wu Yize to break their duck, but it didn't work
yeah,
out that way. And I suppose
no.
that's the joy of sport is.
Well, I mean, Wu Yiza really. I mean, that final in Scotland, he probably could have done with winning that. Not just because it's a ranking event and it's good to win, but he doesn't want to be labelled that sort of losing finalist tag that unfortunately we've given to Jack Lazowski over the years. He's been in
Yeah.
all those finals, albeit losing to Judd in many of those. And Jack's been through a lot in the last few months away from the table, so I would like to think he's going to come back, into the new season and play well. But with Wuyiza, I think he'd be fine, by the way. But look, everyone felt he would win that final, and he didn't. And now he's still got to get one on the board, And the problem with some of the younger players, I don't just mean Chinese players, but the same applies to all of the younger players, is there's a huge disparity between their best and worst. And Wuyiza's best is absolutely brilliant, as we saw against Neil Robertson in that English Open final. But his his B game or his C game, unfortunately, leaves him open and vulnerable to losing to just about anybody, I think.
And players who are under pressure. So Robert Milkins, he's got a lot of points that have come off recently. Anthony McGill, Zhang Ando, he's got a lot of points coming off this season. There's a bit of pressure on these guys to step it up and get better results. Who do you
So,
see
yeah.
under pressure?
Well, you mentioned three names there. I mean, yeah, those three didn't have good seasons on the back of good ones previously. I mean, I don't know what's happened to McGill. He's disappeared off the radar a little bit, hasn't he? I don't know why. But you do feel these things go in cycles. A lot of times players will have a bad season and they'll follow it up with a good one. I mean, Sean Murphy on a higher level has been an example of that. I wouldn't write any of those guys off. You've only got to get a good start. Someone like, let's just say, McGill. I mean, Milkins, he's very unpredictable, Rob. I like Rob. He is an unpredictable player, but um, in the case of McGill, he's gone AWOL, hasn't he? He's right down the rankings. If he gets a good start to the season, who knows? He could leapfrog right up because the way the rankings work now. You've only got to have a good month, 6 weeks, and you're all those problems behind you. Of where you were placed in the rankings. So I wouldn't write him off. I don't really know what's been happening with McGill. He's almost, you mentioned his name there, and he's just seems to have just vanished a little bit from the scene. But I reckon he'll be back.
Well, he's a Crucible semi-finalist. Well, he lost that semi-final in the most gut-wrenching way. I
Yeah,
mean, what a frame that was! Easily one of the most memorable frames the Crucible has ever seen. He can do it, and he's shown that he's got the guts to do it. He can do the mental side of the game as well, and you don't get to the semi-final of the Crucible unless you're bloody good. But there's
yeah.
something's not clicking at the moment. I know he tried a new cue for a little while, and I don't know, maybe he's chopping and
That was never
changing.
going to work.
It's
That was
no.
never going to work, was it? But what I do know about him, and that I mean, everything about the 2020 championship was mad, wasn't it? The fact that it was behind closed doors that match. I mean, can you imagine what the crowd would have done had they been able to
Oh.
witness that last frame? But I do know that Eurosport wanted to at the start of the next season reenact not so much reenact it, but speak to all the players, both players involved in that, the referee, everybody. And McGill apparently didn't want to be involved in that. He said that that match cost me a lot of money and it cost me a chance of a world final. So he took it badly losing that match, and you do get that in snooker. You get matches that you'll never forget losing. That some matches you might lose and the next day you're okay. Okay, that's gone now. But there are matches that you never forget. That you think, "Wow, how have I lost that? How has this happened to me that I should have won?" And maybe McGill's never quite got over that. He has played some good stuff since. Well, we'll see. We'll see. There's so many players, really, aren't there, like that to be talking about one, but it is interesting that you bring his name up.
It shows the depth on tour at the moment. When Lepe Fan ranked 80 odd is winning tournaments, when you get lower ranked players reaching finals, it shows that complacency ain't an option anymore. It's consistency, and I think that's why Judd is so good. That's why Judd's so successful. He is consistent, even in those lottery best of seven matches. He just gets it done. It's
Yeah, I mean, what were the odds at the start of the season? Now we don't know what's going to happen this season. What are the odds of Judd Trump winning no ranking events this season? I think the odds are pretty big. I mean, clearly no one's got a divine right to win anything, but you know, it would be. It's not impossible that you won't win one, of course, because only one person can win every event. But you would expect him to pick up trophies along the way, wouldn't you?
it would be a surprise. Let's just say
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it would be a surprise. I will take a minute now to talk about what's coming up on the Snooker Hall podcast. In the coming weeks, snooker writer Michael Day, the man behind Totally Snookered, will come onto the podcast again, returning to the podcast. Also returning to the podcast, Gary Moss, a man Nick Metcalf referred to as a great judge of the game. So I agree with Nick on that. On the playing side, I'm happy to say that Ian Burns will pop in to talk about regaining his place on the tour, qualifying via Q School, the grind of Q School, and his work in snooker coaching. The recent episode featuring Michael Holt has got some great feedback, so thank you for that. It'll be interesting to see Ian's approach. If you want to get in touch, share some stories with fellow snooker fans, the email address is contactus@thesnookerhall.com, and you can follow the show on X, Blue Sky, and Instagram. The handle for all platforms is the same, at the Snooker Hall. Neal, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, sharing your opinions with the Snooker Hall community. You're welcome back anytime.
My pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
Would you like to sign us off?
Dan, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it ever so much, and good luck. I'll be listening to this podcast more and more now, and thanks for your interest. And next time I see you in the graduate, we'll have a beer.
Sounds good to me. Thanks, Neal.
Cheers. Thanks very much.